Well, hello everyone. This is Dr. Ron, and I'm back with you for another episode of Boomer Life Lessons and Stories. I do hope this episode finds you and your family doing well, and of course, doing the best you can in the environment that we're in. Hopefully, we're going to get this pandemic thing knocked in the head and eventually get back to life as normal. But I do suspect that life as normal will have changed, and that will never go back fully to the way it was prior to this pandemic. And hopefully YouTube won't ding me too much for mentioning the word pandemic, but sometimes platforms like YouTube and other social media want to avoid, I guess, the spread of gloom and doom. And I'm a pretty optimistic person. I think you found out from dealing with me in the past episodes, or perhaps if you're one of my students in class. But having said that, where are we headed today and what is today's episode? Well, I've thought about it quite a bit, and I've actually thought about this topic throughout my adult life and my working career. Today's topic our episode is entitled, Who Are You and What Defines You? Now, if that sounds interesting to you, please stick around and we'll get to it in just a moment. But I would like to remind you, if you hear anything that you like, if you could like, share, and subscribe, that will help me with the YouTube algorithm. Okay, I'm sure that Miss Boomer is putting notes and things up around my head. She does have quite a bit of fun with me at times. Just ignore her. Don't encourage her, because when you encourage her, she gets quite creative at my expense. But that is as it should be, I expect, after what has it been now? Gosh, 24, 45 years of marriage. I suppose she's earned the right to do this. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, how do you determine who you are? And sometimes for people just graduating from high school and college, you kind of have a sense of perhaps who you are and who you want to be, but you're not sure. I mean, we think, who am I and for what purpose am I here? Now, that's an existential discussion, isn't it? Why do I exist? And I think we all go through that. And those are some of the fundamental things that we have to cope with. I think it's a rite of becoming an adult. We have to go through this type of thinking process in order to begin to understand who we are. But the real question is, how do you answer this? Who am I and what defines me? Well, as if you were meeting somebody new, I think the answer is the same. When you meet somebody new, you go through a period of getting to know them. You get to know what they're about, what their hopes and dreams are. You get to know what's important to them. You watch their behaviors and understand why they began to do the things they do, what motivates them. This is so very, very important when we meet new people. Life is diverse, and there's lots of people in our lives that we just love and they're very dear to us. And then there are people that we meet who are just acquaintances, and we enjoy a good conversation with them. And perhaps there are some people that you run across. You can't say, actually, you can say, I'm not like Will Rogers. Will Rogers has the famous quote, I never met a man I didn't like. And if we could all say that, then we would be probably better off. But invariably, we meet people that, for whatever reason, it's like putting a square peg in a round hole. It can't be done. There's just nothing in common. The way they do things is different from you. You just can't relate to them. And when you can't relate to something, you can't develop a relationship. So when we begin to get acquainted with people, we're trying to find out, what motivates them and how they work around other people and what we have in common. Most often, we start building the relationship upon what we have in common with somebody else. And that's all very good and important. But then we begin to know what's different about ourselves, and we find that interesting. But at least it starts with something that we perhaps may have in common, an interest, an activity, a club, or whatever the case is, maybe even the educational environment or the school that we get our degrees from, or we graduated from high school. But you have to start with something that kind of attracts you to that person. Now, why should that be any different when you're trying to understand who you are and you're trying to get acquainted with yourself? You really need to understand what is important to you. And early on in your life, perhaps that's a little nebulous. It's difficult to discern. So you begin to have to interrogate yourself. And notice the word I use. I use this a lot when I'm dealing with my class. I don't use the word inspect because it's too relaxed. It's too low energy, right? But when you interrogate something, you get involved with it. You throw your energy into it. You actively embrace it. And that way you really understand what it's about. So when I say that you interrogate yourself, you begin to ask yourself questions. And more importantly, when you ask yourself those questions, you begin to answer them, and you must listen to yourself. One of the things I tell students and individuals getting ready to go out into corporate America, they talk about, well, what company should I work for? Even though they may have a degree in engineering or in accounting or in business, they are not necessarily right for every company out there. And they're not, and every company is possibly not right for them. So I ask them, what's important to you, right? What do you like about this company that you don't like about that company? You see, they begin to talk to themselves in a introspective way to determine what is important to them. An example would be in my early career working life, I had the opportunity to go to work for Martin Marietta in 1984. Yes, that was a long time ago, right? But it still resonates with me. And one of the things I did not ask in the interview was how much overtime is expected of an individual, right? Now, in my previous work life, and I've been 5 years out of college working as a senior engineer, and I put in overtime, but it was, casual overtime to make sure I got the job done, did it right, and so forth. And it was, things were ready to go to my customer, whether it's internal or external. But I didn't ask the question when I interviewed with Martin Marietta. And when I went to work for them, I was suddenly aghast, literally. There was an expectation that everybody that worked for that company at that time had to give 4 to 6 hours on a Saturday. It didn't matter if there was something very, very pressing that needed to be done. You just needed to be there. And so there was this idea that you had to work overtime. Well, literally, I assimilated and acclimated myself to that work environment, and I learned how to manage and navigate that work environment and was successful. But it didn't prevent me from going through that culture shock, so to speak, the shock that more was being demanded of me as a professional engineer. But had I asked the question, I would have been more aware of what I was going into, and perhaps it might have changed my decision to hire on. Maybe not. To be honest, I am so very, very happy that I had my time with Martin Marietta that became Lockheed Martin, and I spent most of my working career as an engineer, manager, director in companies like that. But the point I'm trying to make here is you have to ask the question to get to know the item, whether it's a company or some activity or some club or some place you're going to work. Now, why should that be any different when you're trying to get to know yourself? You ask your question, what is important to me? Well, what's important to me is work-life balance. I'm not going to live to work. I'm going to work to live. That's one view. There are people that I have met and worked with, they live to work. That's how they define themselves. And we're going to come back to that thought. how do you define yourself in just a moment. But once you begin to ask yourself these questions, what are my likes and what are my dislikes? Where do I like to spend my time? If I had nothing to do that was pressing, what would I like to do to reward myself, so to speak? And when you begin to answer these questions, you find a little bit more out about yourself. You have to think about what it is you enjoy doing with your time, but you need to be practical. Now, the reason why I say that is if you're not practical and you say, well, I just like to recreate all the time, I just like to have time off. That's not practical, because you and I know what's very important to us is taking care of our family, and recreating all the time, is not going to take care of your family unless your recreation becomes your profession. And some people absolutely get to do what they enjoy doing as a recreation, as a profession. I mean, football players love the game, right? Baseball players love the game. So the professionals really enjoy doing what they're doing, but it is their job. For most of us, being practical is recognizing that there's a separation between what we must do to take care of our family and what we can do to enjoy our time off, right? So when you think about this and being practical, you begin to understand where your life's direction is. It's over here. This is where I want to head, not so much over here. And you get to understand where you want to spend the rest of your working life. And realistically, let's say you graduate from high school, you're 18 years old. The rest of your working life literally is going to be about 66, 67 years of age. So that's a very long time. If you graduate from from college, you're 22 years old, 23 years old. 66 years of age is still kind of out there. We're talking in excess of 40 years of your working career. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to spend that working time. You don't want to be that person where you're miserable, right? It's not going to go well for you. Your life will be unstable. So by getting to know yourself and understanding what is important, you're able to determine what it is you want to do as a vocation, as a profession that you can enjoy and contribute to society and in taking care of your family. All of that is so very, very important. So at the apex of this conversation is getting to know who you are and what is important to you and what your purpose in life should be. Now, your purpose could actually split. It could become a purpose in your working career. I want to get into executive management, or I want to be the best technical person I possibly can be. That's great. That's one purpose in terms of striving toward. And everything that you do in your working life is striving to put you into a better position to achieve that purpose or that goal. And then your other purpose is what you do in your personal life. Do you enjoy helping others? Do you enjoy giving of your time? You see, you want to spend your time in a quality fashion, whether it's in your work life or in your personal life. And all of it is to benefit your family and those around you, your loved ones and friends, and your community, right? If a person becomes very selfish and they are inward looking and they don't care about other people, I've seen those people take great falls in their professional career. It always catches up when they're doing things that are self-serving and not right for the company, or self-serving and selfishly in their own life versus taking care of the family and those around them. Okay, now that we've discussed that, how do you define yourself, right? What do you find yourself? Or what defines you? Well, that's a more interesting question as well, in that there's two ways of looking at yourself in terms of how do you define yourself. One way is inward and another way is outward. Now let's start with the outward looking way of defining yourself. If you define yourself by external things, by your possessions, by the credentials that you hold, whatever it is external, it becomes very unstable. Now, why do I say that? Well, people do well and then they don't do so well in parts of their life. People do well and then they go into bankruptcy, or some external crisis erupt, like the Great Depression and the stock market crash in 1929. Literally, there were millionaires who became paupers, broke overnight, and you saw many of them. It's a tragic, tragic thing. You can go back and read the news reports and look at some of the film that was taken back then. People were jumping out of windows out of tall buildings, and they weren't supermen or women. They were committing suicide. And it was a very tragic and terrible thing. Why did that happen? Because they defined themselves externally by what they possessed and what other people thought of them, right? So the only point I'm making here is when you begin to define yourself by external things, those things come and go. And therefore, it puts you in a very unstable environment if you're defining yourself by your Mercedes and then you go broke. You no longer can afford the Mercedes and you have to get rid of it. You have to sell it. Then who are you? You see, it's an up and down type of scenario all the time when you begin to define yourself externally. So how should you avoid that? Well, you look at the other way of defining yourself. You look inward. You determine who you are, what is important to you. You begin to think about your purpose in life and striving toward achieving that purpose. And you measure yourself by how close you are in achieving that purpose in life in terms of helping others. You see, it's an attitude. It's not about possessions. It's not about keeping score. It's about what you want to do in terms of helping others. And we start with yourself, then your family, and we go outward to the community. So when you begin to define yourself, you look inward and say, am I an ethical person? Do I hold near and dear and being honest in all things? When I say something, is it the truth as much as I can understand it to be the truth? Do I intentionally lead people astray and mislead people? That would be a very wrong thing to do. Do I do everything in my power to present myself as somebody that's there to help and that people can depend on? That sort of thing. When you look inward and ask yourself, and you create that person you want to be, and then you conduct yourself to that standard, because it is standards that you've assimilated and integrated into your being. It's not something external to yourself. It's who you are internally. That begins to define you. And you know what? That does not easily change. It does not come and go. As a matter of fact, there's been studies done where they studied youth and teenagers and young adults and so forth. And what they came to understand is our value set pretty much is locked in place around 13, 14 years of age. That's some of the studies have shown that. And then to reassert that value set, it takes a significant emotional event to change it. So we understand who we become and who we are and who we want to be, and then we marshal ourselves in accordance with that. And if you're doing that with the ultimate goal of being the best person you possibly can be and helping others, then that does not become unstable. If you lose your wealth, okay, that was external things. I'm still able to help the community by doing the things that I do. I'm still able to help my family with my time and effort and my interest in them. You see, it's something that doesn't change easily or is disrupted easily. So that's the bottom line. When you begin to think about internally who you are and define yourself internally, you stand upon solid ground. But if you define yourself externally, you stand upon a very shaky ground, a ground that can be eroded away and cause you to stumble or fall. And that's what is important here, to understand who you are, what your purpose in life is, and how you define yourself and what your role in life will be. I hope I've said something that has been very helpful to you in this episode. If I have, please again, like, share, and subscribe. And also leave a comment down below. That will help me know that I am helping you, because really that's what it's all about. You're my family out there in my YouTube land. And with that, you take care of yourself. You know you're always on my mind.